The neon sign outside Mel's truck stop diner flickered between red and darkness, casting intermittent shadows across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. Detective Ray Martinez pulled his unmarked sedan between two semis and sat for a moment, letting the engine tick as it cooled. The digital clock on his dashboard read 11:47 p.m. He shouldn't be stopping. The drive from Omaha back to his apartment in Lincoln was only an hour, but the conversation with his ex-wife still echoed in his head. "Jessica needs that tuition money, Ray. She's counting on us." Maria's voice had carried that familiar edge of disappointment, the same tone she'd used during their divorce proceedings 3 years ago. 22 years of marriage, reduced to arguing over their daughter's college expenses in Maria's sterile new kitchen while her new husband pretended not to listen from the living room. Ray pushed through the diner's glass door, triggering an electronic chime that seemed too cheerful for the late hour. The place smelled like coffee that had been brewing too long and grease that had seen better days. Only a handful of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, leaving most of the red vinyl. Booths in shadow. Behind the counter, an elderly man in a grease-stained apron worked the grill with practiced efficiency. A waitress emerged from the kitchen carrying a coffee pot, blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, moving with the kind of quiet competence that came from years of late-night shifts. She looked up as Ray settled into a booth near the window, offering a tired but genuine smile. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for the cup at his place setting. "Please, and whatever's good on the menu that won't keep me up all night. Burger and fries, nothing fancy, but Jimmy makes them right." She poured the coffee with steady hands. Ray noticed her nails were short, practical, no polish. A working woman's hands. "I'm Sarah." "Ray." She nodded and headed back to the kitchen, calling out his order to Jimmy. Ray watched her move, noting the way she carried herself, alert, aware of her surroundings. Most waitresses in places like this developed that awareness out of necessity, but there was something different about Sarah's vigilance, something that made the cop in him take notice. He was halfway through his burger when the bell chimed again. 3 men entered, and Ray's training kicked in immediately. The way they moved, the way their eyes swept the diner, the bulges beneath. Their jackets, everything screamed trouble. The leader was tall and lean with dark hair and a scar running from his left ear to his jawline. Ray recognized him immediately. Tommy Voss, a street-level narcotics figure he'd arrested 2 years ago for robbery with a weapon. Ray's hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon, but Sarah appeared beside his table, refilling his coffee. "Cup." Her movements blocked his line of sight to the men, and when their eyes met, she gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. "More coffee?" she asked loudly, but her voice carried an undertone of warning. Ray froze. Why was she stopping him? Did she recognize these men? Was she in danger, or was she trying to protect him? His police training screamed at him to act, to take control of the situation before it escalated. But something in Sarah's eyes, a desperate intelligence, a plea for trust, made him hesitate. Tommy's voice cut through the diner's quiet atmosphere. "Nobody move. This is a hold-up." The elderly cook looked up from his grill, spatula still in hand. Sarah set down the coffee pot with careful precision, raising her hands. Ray's choice crystallized in that moment. Trust this stranger's warning, or follow 20 years of police training. He chose trust. "Wallets, jewelry, whatever you got," Tommy continued, gesturing with a handgun. His 2 companions flanked him, both carrying weapons, both nervous. "Make it quick, and nobody gets hurt." Sarah reached into her apron and pulled out a thick roll of bills, far too much cash for a small-town waitress to be carrying around. She placed it on the nearest table without argument, then looked directly at Ray again. The message was clear: play along. Ray pulled out his wallet, his mind racing. Why did Sarah have so much money? Why was she protecting him from acting? And why did he feel like he was missing something crucial about this entire situation? Tommy approached their table, scooping up Sarah's cash with obvious satisfaction. Well, looks like our little waitress has been holding out on Uncle Sam. He turned to Ray, hand extended. Your turn, friend. Ray handed over his wallet, hoping Tommy wouldn't look inside, but luck had never been his strong suit. Tommy flipped it open and went very still. Then he looked up, smiling with genuine pleasure. Boys, we hit the jackpot. We got ourselves a cop. The temperature in the diner seemed to drop 10 degrees. Tommy's companions, a stocky man with prison tattoos covering his arms and a younger guy who couldn't have been more than 19, both raised their weapons. I told you we should have checked the parking lot, the younger one said, his voice cracking with nerves. Shut up, Kevin, Tommy snapped, then turned back to Ray. Detective Ray Martinez, Lincoln PD. Well, Detective, this changes things considerably. Ray kept his hands visible on the table, fighting every instinct that told him to go for his gun. Sarah stepped closer, and he could smell her perfume, something light and clean that seemed out of place in this greasy diner. He's not really a cop, she said suddenly. He's security at the mall. Ray, tell them. Ray stared at her, confused by the lie, but playing along. She's right. I just carry the badge for work. Mall security. Tommy laughed, a sound like grinding. Glass, you think I'm stupid. I remember you, Detective Martinez. You put me away 2 years ago. Robbery with a weapon. Got me 18 months in county. He gestured with his weapon. This is what we call poetic justice. Behind the counter, Jimmy the cook started moving toward something near the register. Ray caught the motion in his peripheral vision and tensed. Tommy saw it too. Don't even think about it, old man. But Jimmy's hand was already reaching for what Ray realized must be a silent alarm. Tommy moved faster than Ray would have expected, crossing the distance in 3 quick strides and bringing his weapon down at the counter. Jimmy stumbled and went down. Ray started to rise, but Sarah's hand pressed down on his shoulder, firm and warning. Please, she whispered, don't. The word hit him like a physical blow. She was protecting him again. But why? His training screamed at him to help Jimmy, to take control, to end the situation. But Sarah's touch held him in place, and he found himself trusting her judgment, even as it went against everything he'd been taught. That's what happens when people don't cooperate, Tommy announced to the diner. He walked back to Ray's table, studying him with cold interest. You know, Detective, I spent a lot of nights in jail thinking about you, wondering what it would be like to turn the tables. Look, just take what you want and go, Ray said. Nobody needs to get hurt. Nobody needs to get hurt, Tommy laughed again. Jimmy there might disagree with you, but don't worry. We're not going anywhere just yet. See, this wasn't exactly a random hold-up. Kevin, the young one, shifted nervously by the door. Tommy, we need to go. That old guy might have hit an alarm. Let him, Tommy said. In fact, I'm counting on it. Ray felt ice in his stomach. This wasn't a simple hold-up, it was a trap. But for whom? For him. Had they been watching him, waiting for him to stop here? You come here every Tuesday night, Detective, Tommy continued, confirming Ray's worst fears. Same booth, same order. Very predictable, makes a man's job much easier. Sarah's hand was still on Ray's shoulder, and he could feel her trembling slightly. Fear or something else? Tommy, you don't want to do this, she said. There are other ways. Sarah. Tommy turned to her with mock sadness. I thought you were smarter than that. Getting involved with cops is bad for your health. Ray's mind raced. How did Tommy know Sarah's name? How long had they been watching this place? And why did Sarah seem to know more about this situation than she was letting on? She's not involved in anything, Ray said. She's just doing her job. Is she? Tommy raised an eyebrow. Tell me, Detective, do you know what your girlfriend here does when she's not slinging hash? She's not my girlfriend. I just met her tonight. Tommy looked from Ray to Sarah and back again, his scarred face splitting into a grin. Really? Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like she's awful concerned about your well-being. In the distance, Ray heard the first faint wail of sirens. Kevin heard them too and started pacing by the windows. "Tommy, they're coming. We need to go." "We will," Tommy said calmly. He grabbed Sarah by the arm and pulled her away from Ray's table. "But first, we're going to send the good detective's friends a message." He held the weapon close to Sarah, near her head. Her eyes found Ray's across the diner, and in them he saw something that made his blood run cold. Not fear, but apology, as if she was sorry for what was about to happen, as if this was somehow her fault. "Get on your knees, detective," Tommy ordered. Ray slid out of the booth and knelt on the diner's worn linoleum floor. A dark stain was spreading by the counter, and the smell of coffee mixed with the metallic tang of tension. "That's better," Tommy said. "Now we wait for your friends to arrive. And then we're going to have ourselves a real party." The sirens grew louder, and Ray realized with growing horror that this had been planned from the beginning. Tommy wasn't running from the police, he was waiting for them. And somehow Sarah was part of it all. Chapter 3. The Twist. The sirens reached a crescendo and then cut off abruptly. Through the diner's windows, Ray could see the red and blue lights of at least 3 patrol cars illuminating the parking lot. A spotlight blazed to life, flooding the diner's interior with harsh white light. "Tommy Voss!" a voice called through a bullhorn. "This is the Lincoln Police Department. Release your hostages and come out with your hands up." Tommy laughed, pressing his weapon closer to Sarah. She winced but didn't cry out. "You hear that, detective? Your friends want to negotiate. How touching." Kevin was practically bouncing with nervous energy by the window. "This is insane, Tommy. We should have been gone an hour ago." "Relax," Tommy said. "Everything's going according to plan." Ray caught Sarah's eye again, and this time he saw something different, a subtle shift in her expression that looked almost like preparation. Before he could process what that meant, she leaned slightly toward Tommy and whispered something Ray couldn't hear. Tommy nodded. "Smart girl. Always thinking." He looked at Ray. "Your girlfriend here just reminded me about the back exit, through the kitchen. Aren't you lucky to have someone looking out for you?" Ray's blood turned to ice water. The way she'd said it, the way Tommy had responded, it wasn't the desperate suggestion of a hostage. It was the reminder of someone who knew the plan. "Sarah," Ray said quietly, "what's going on?" She looked at him then, and he saw the truth in her eyes even before she spoke. "I'm sorry, Ray, I really am." Tommy grinned. "Didn't you tell him, sweetheart? Sarah here has been working at this diner for 3 months. 3 months of watching, learning routines, figuring out the perfect setup. She's the one who told us you stop here every Tuesday. She's the one who suggested we make it look like a random hold-up." The betrayal hit Ray like a physical blow. Every protective gesture, every warning, every moment of apparent concern, it had all been an act. She hadn't been trying to save him. She'd been setting him up. Why? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Because Tommy needed someone inside," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the weapon near her head. "Someone to watch the patterns, learn the schedules. And because you destroyed his life, I arrested a criminal. That's my job." "You destroyed more than just his life," Sarah said. "Do you remember what happened after you arrested Tommy?" Ray tried to think back. The arrest had been routine. Tommy, caught coming out of a convenience store with a bag of cash and the owner's shirt stained. "Open and shut case. His girlfriend," Sarah continued, "Marie Prescott. She was pregnant. Did you know that?" Ray felt the first stirring of memory. There had been a woman screaming and crying as they'd led Tommy away. But pregnant? He'd had no way of knowing. "She lost the baby 2 weeks after the arrest," Sarah said. "Stress," the doctors said. And then she lost her job because of the publicity. And then she lost her apartment. By the time Tommy got out of prison, she was gone. Substance-related incident. I didn't know. Marie was my sister. The words hit Ray like a punch to the gut. Everything clicked into place. The careful planning, the months of surveillance, the personal vendetta wrapped in the guise of a simple hold-up. So this isn't about money, Ray said. This was never about money, Tommy confirmed. This is about justice, the kind of justice the system doesn't provide. Through the windows, Ray could see officers taking positions behind their vehicles. Someone was setting up what looked like a precision long-range setup on the hood of a patrol car. "Here's how this is going to work, Detective," Tommy said. "You're going to walk to that door, nice and slow. You're going to tell your friends that I've got 3 hostages in here, and if they want to see any of them alive, they need to back off and let us walk away. They'll never agree to that. They will if you make it convincing. Tell them I'm desperate. Tell them I've got nothing to lose. Tell them whatever you want, but make them back off." Ray looked at Sarah, still trying to reconcile the woman who had seemed to protect him with the woman who had been planning his destruction. "And if I do what you want, then maybe Jimmy lives. Maybe the people outside don't get caught in a crossfire." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Tommy hadn't gone to this much trouble just to walk away. This was about revenge, pure and simple. And it would end with Ray's death, probably broadcast live on the evening news. Ray stood slowly, his knees protesting after being on the hard floor. "All right, I'll do it." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he thought he saw genuine surprise there. Had she expected him to refuse, to fight? "Smart man," Tommy said. "Now move." Ray walked toward the front door, each step feeling like a mile. Behind him, he could hear Tommy and his crew following, using the hostages as human. "Shields!" The spotlight from outside was so bright it hurt his eyes, and he could barely make out the shapes of the officers behind their vehicles. He reached for the door handle, then stopped. Something was wrong. Sarah had been whispering to Tommy, giving him advice about escape routes, but she was also Marie's sister, supposedly seeking revenge for her death. Why would she help Tommy escape if she wanted justice? Unless... Ray turned back to look at her, and in that split second, he saw the truth. Sarah met his eyes, and her lips formed a single, silent word. Now. That's when he realized Sarah hadn't been setting him up. She'd been setting up Tommy. The revelation hit Ray like lightning. Sarah's positioning throughout the evening, her protective gestures, her intimate knowledge of the plan. She wasn't Tommy's accomplice. She was something else entirely. Before he could fully process the implications, Sarah drove her elbow back hard into Tommy's ribs. He doubled over, gasping, and his grip on her loosened just enough for her to break free. "Federal agent!" she shouted, diving behind the counter as Tommy raised his weapon toward her. "Ray, down!" Ray threw himself sideways as shots rang out in the diner. The front windows exploded inward as the officers outside responded. Kevin screamed and went down, clutching his shoulder. The stocky man with the tattoos fired wildly at the ceiling before he was struck and went down. Tommy, still struggling to breathe from Sarah's elbow strike, swung his weapon toward Ray. "You son of a..." But Sarah was already moving. From behind the counter she produced a service sidearm that had been hidden somewhere in the kitchen. Her first shot took Tommy in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second shot put him down. The exchange lasted less than 30 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. When the smoke cleared, Kevin was sobbing on the floor with a shattered shoulder. The tattooed man didn't make it, and Tommy was unconscious and injured. Ray's ears were ringing from the noise, but he could hear Sarah shouting orders to the officers, now flooding through the door. "2 suspects down, 1 in custody. I need paramedics for the cook behind the counter." She moved with practiced efficiency, checking Jimmy's pulse, securing weapons, coordinating with the responding officers. This wasn't her first rodeo. "Sarah," Ray called out, his voice hoarse. "Sarah, what?" She looked at him across the chaos of the crime scene. and for the first time all evening, her expression was completely honest. No act, no deception, no careful calculation. Just exhaustion and relief. "Special Agent Sarah Chen, DEA," she said, pulling out a badge from somewhere inside her apron. "I've been tracking Tommy's crew for 6 months. They've hit 12 truck stops across 4 states, always the same pattern. Inside person, detailed surveillance, coordinated." "Hold up," Ray stared at her. "Marie Prescott was my partner's girlfriend, not my sister. And she didn't die from an overdose. I mean, not the way it was reported. Tommy killed her when she threatened to testify against him on a controlled substances charge. He staged it to look like a tragedy." Sarah's voice hardened. "We've been trying to build a case against him for a homicide case, but we needed evidence. Tonight was supposed to be that evidence. And I almost screwed it up. You almost got yourself killed." She moved closer, lowering her voice as paramedics rushed to tend to Jimmy and the wounded suspects. "When I saw you sitting there, recognizing Tommy, I knew if you drew your weapon, people were going to get hurt. Maybe Tommy's people, maybe you, maybe innocent bystanders. I had to keep you calm until my backup could get in position." Ray looked around the diner, impact marks in the walls. Dark stains on the floor, shattered glass everywhere. "Your backup? 3 of those patrol cars aren't local. My team has been coordinating with Lincoln PD for 2 weeks, waiting for Tommy to make his move." She smiled tiredly. "We just didn't expect him to pick tonight to go after a cop." "How did you know I'd trust you?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the paramedics work on Jimmy. The old cook was conscious now, complaining loudly about his head, which Ray took as a good sign. "I didn't," she said finally. "I just hoped that you were the kind of cop who could read people, the kind who would trust his instincts even when they went against his training." Ray thought about that. All evening his instincts had been screaming conflicting messages. Protect the innocent, trust the badge, follow procedure. But underneath it all had been something else. Something that had told him Sarah was more than she appeared to be. "The money in your apron," he said. "That was part of the setup. Marked bills. If Tommy had gotten away with them, we could have tracked him through the serial numbers. It was insurance, in case the arrest went bad." Dawn was beginning to break outside, painting the parking lot in shades of gold and pink. The crime scene. Investigators were arriving, and Ray knew he'd be here for hours, giving statements and filling out reports. But for now, he was content to sit in his booth with a cup of fresh coffee. Sarah had somehow convinced one of the officers to make a new pot and watch her work with her team. She moved with quiet competence, coordinating evidence collection, debriefing with her supervisors, making sure the wounded suspects received proper medical care. It was the same efficiency he'd noticed when she was serving coffee, but now he understood what he'd been seeing. This was a federal agent who'd been undercover for months, maintaining her cover while building a case against dangerous criminals. "Detective Martinez?" One of the FBI agents approached his table. "We'll need a full statement, but Agent Chen asked me to tell you that your cooperation tonight probably saved lives." Ray nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "Agent Chen did all the work. I just tried not to get in the way." The agent smiled. "That's not how she tells it. She says you made the right choice at every critical moment. Not easy for a local cop to defer to federal jurisdiction, especially when shots are being fired." After the agent moved away, Sarah approached his table. She'd cleaned her hands and changed out of her waitress uniform into jeans and a DEA windbreaker. She looked different now, still tired but no longer carrying the weight of maintaining a false identity. "Can I sit?" she asked. Ray gestured to the booth across from him. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also something else, relief maybe, or satisfaction at a job completed. "So what happens now?" he asked. Tommy faces a long-term federal sentence. Kevin probably makes a deal and testifies. The tattooed guy, well, he doesn't get to hurt anyone else. She sipped her coffee, making a face. God, I've been pretending this stuff tastes good for 3 months. Ray laughed, surprising himself. And you? Back to Washington? Eventually. After the paperwork, the depositions, the trial prep. She looked around the diner, taking in the tape and the teams. Mel, the owner, he's been great through all this, knew what was going on, let us use his place as a base. I think he's going to remodel, try to put this behind him. Will you keep in touch? I mean, for the case. Sarah met his eyes, and he saw something there that made his pulse quicken. Not the careful calculation of an undercover agent, not the professional distance of a federal agent, but something personal and real. The case will require some coordination between agencies, she said carefully. Probably take months to sort out all the jurisdictional issues. Probably. I might need to stay in Lincoln longer than planned, make sure everything goes smoothly. That would be helpful. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise over the truck stop. Around them, the controlled chaos of a crime scene continued, but for this moment, Ray felt a strange sense of peace. He'd made the right choices, trusted the right person, and lived to see another day. Sarah? Yeah? When you asked me to trust you, how did you know I would? She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. When she finally looked at him, there was something vulnerable in her expression. I didn't, she said, but I hoped. Sometimes that's all you can do. Hope that when the moment comes, people will choose to trust each other instead of fear each other. Ray thought about his conversation with Maria earlier that evening, about Jessica's college tuition and the weight of old disappointments. It felt like a lifetime ago. Those small domestic concerns overshadowed by matters of life and death. But maybe that was the point. Life was made up of both kinds of moments, the mundane and the critical, and how you handled both of them said something about who you were. Agent Chen, one of her colleagues approached the table. We're ready for your debrief. Sarah stood, then hesitated. Ray, when this is all over, when the paperwork's done and the trials are finished, maybe we could have coffee somewhere that doesn't have impact marks in the walls. Ray smiled. I'd like that. But somewhere that serves better coffee and doesn't have impact marks in the walls. Deal. She walked away to join her team, and Ray sat alone in the booth as the sun climbed higher over the Nebraska plains. The diner would reopen eventually, probably with a new coat of paint and reinforced windows. Truckers would stop for coffee and burgers, unaware of the drama that had played out here. Life would go on, but for Ray Martinez, something had changed. In the space of a few hours, he'd learned something about trust, about instinct, about the split-second decisions that defined who you were when everything was on the line. And maybe, if he was very lucky, he'd learned something about the possibility of new beginnings. Outside, a truck pulled into the parking lot, its driver probably wondering why there were so many police cars at Mel's truck stop. Ray watched the driver climb down from his cab, stretch, and head toward the diner, only to be turned away by an officer with crime scene tape. The ordinary world, interrupted by moments of extraordinary choice. Ray finished his coffee and prepared to give his statement, already looking forward to the day when he could return to this place under different circumstances. When he could sit across from Sarah Chen, not as a detective and a federal agent thrown together by crisis, but as two people who had chosen to trust each other when it mattered most. The morning light streamed through the shattered windows, warming his face, and Ray Martinez allowed himself to believe that sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, trust could be rewarded with something that looked a lot like hope. Thank you for listening to this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please support the channel, subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments so you don't miss the next episodes. See you in the next story.